documents are very important. For example, with regard to children, later on when you register at any school, they always ask for parents' IDs. They will take you, schools will take you even if you are at that age, you don't have a parent's ID. But once you have to write matric, it is obligatory to have the ID, your own ID, identification card, and you can't sit for a matric. That immediately blocks your future, because if you can't write matric, you cannot go to university. So it blocks your future immediately. You can't register for matric, but it also means that you can't get a job. In order to get a job, you need an ID. In order to go for a health service, you need an ID. In order to travel, you need an ID. Your future just comes to a standstill already at that point. You might as well be dead as far as anybody is concerned, because you are not registered anywhere. You don't exist. First of all, I think ignorance is an obstacle, because nobody thinks that a birth certificate means anything. They don't think it's an important document. They say, for example, you can get it later in life, which in fact will not happen. Or they would say the Home Affairs Office is too far from us, and we can't afford, we don't have money to. You get that story all the time in rural areas. We don't have the money to travel to the center, to the city, to the town where you can get Home Affairs. So they don't bother. Until your parents literally die and you are still young, you don't have an ID document. But also, if you are a child of a migrant or a refugee and you come into an economic migrant, or people who just cross the border without any documents, and you leave, you grow up, years pass quickly, you don't have a birth certificate from wherever you were born, and you've crossed into another country, your parents are migrants, you run into the same problem. The local government is not going to register you just because you just walked across the border. So that becomes an impediment to getting a document. Probably refugees stand a better chance of being accepted, because refugees, legally speaking, they are recognized. If your country accepts refugees, then there are procedures in place for refugees. But the people who have a problem are your migrants who move around looking for jobs, crossing boundaries. They are the ones who are really at risk, because if you move into a country without documents, you are not part of the system, you are not going to get that document very easily. And the problem is, if you come into a country and you don't have documents, chances are that you will stay that way for a long, long time. So people are left in limbo without knowing where to go exactly. The government does not recognize you, you are in the system, but you don't have the proper papers. And so you remain stateless. You remain stateless. You have no access to, you can't work, no health services, no loans, no what. It's an invidious position you are left in, simply because there are no laws that try to make people citizens. On the contrary, what the government wants to do is to eliminate, to make it difficult for economic migrants to stay in the country. First, I think religious leaders ought to influence the government, or petition the government, or appeal to the government to subscribe to the United Nations treaties. With regard to children, the UN treaty says the children that are found in your country whose parents are unknown, give them a birth certificate so that they later on can have an ID and can be able to find work, live and be protected like any other citizen. Give them your citizenship effectively. That's what the treaties of the UN are saying, and they're urging governments to subscribe to that. Governments are not prepared to accept foreign nationals. They have a problem of coping with the demands of their own citizens. I think religious leaders can also help by trying to raise the awareness in their communities of problems of children born without certificates or who are not registered, and to try and avoid that situation. There's no reason why children cannot be registered. There's absolutely no reason. There has to be a law that obliges people to register children, and that has to be monitored, implemented, and monitored whether the system works. If you do that, hopefully the next generation, you might have fewer and fewer children who are not registered. So I think church leaders can sit down and think about ways and means of solving this problem at that level. If they do that, then they'll be helping the state. They'll be helping their citizens not to get into trouble with the state later on in life. Women, for example, cannot give evidence about the birth of their own children. They need a father to do that. That's where the discrepancy is, because as far as the law is concerned, women are not equal to men. And that is why the law refers to men, wants a man for the DNA and not the mother. I don't know, it's a stupid law, but it exists in the books. And that's why men are always asked for their DNA to test whether these are their children. That law has to change. It's one of the things that can be done by religious leaders, to campaign against these discriminatory laws, because when that changes, then it empowers the mothers to register their own children. That inequality, you've got to fight that, and having fought that, you'll be able then to fight the other discriminatory laws. But that's one of the fundamental problems with registering children, that it still remains a privilege of men. The government is seldom interested in one church organization, but I think if all of them come together, the government will sit and listen. It's quite obvious in the South African case. They are not interested in one particular denomination talking to them. They actually are much more, they feel that when they talk to different religious groups at the same time, they are talking to representatives of different people. And that's more representative than just one denomination. So it's important that you actually have strength from the various traditions addressing issues. You stand a chance of being listened to when you do it that way. What oppresses migrants and refugees are not so much the lack of food. It's not so much the lack of food or clothing. It's the laws. It's the laws that do not allow them to become persons, to become citizens, to access those things that are accessed by any local person: access to medication, access to health services, be able to work, be able to take a loan from the bank, be able to build your own house. Those are the things that persecute migrants, and that's where the need is, I think. First of all, they do all the charitable work, which is important. People have to eat. Help them with, they don't help them with accommodation, but I think accommodation always remains one. That's why people sleep on the streets, because they don't have money to be able to find a place where they can stay, to find a shelter. They can, working together, put up shelters for migrants, but they are never enough. So pastoral care is always concerned about those material needs. But I think they also help when they go into research. The importance of research is to establish facts. If you don't know how many unregistered children you have, or how many people do not have identity documents, it becomes very difficult to make your case. Whereas if you've done enough research with reputable institutions, you are able to say there are so many children who are either on the streets, who needs to be helped, who needs schooling, etc. they do that. Another thing is migrants need legal assistance, legal advice, what to do, especially individual cases. So your pastoral care becomes involved with your legal lawyers for human rights. They then pick up individual cases to try and see whether they can sort out their problems. So that networking is very important. But that's what your pastoral care people do. They network and look for solutions and engage lawyers who are who do work pro bono and in helping, who have become specialists themselves in doing this type of work to relieve people from the burdens they experience. So one of the things we've been trying to advocate the pastoral care people should be doing is to have computers facilities, and people can just walk in and be assisted to apply to be registered online to Home Affairs, because everybody has to. You come into a country, you've got to apply, you've got to be registered. Those who want to be registered. I had an example of a young girl, for example, who when she arrived at matric, she could not write matric exams because she has no ID, 16, 17 years old. She's had to wait for another 2 years while the lawyers were helping to get her an ID. She eventually got one. I don't know how. She managed to get an ID and managed to sit for a matric 3 years down the line. You know, her classmates were just about done with their junior degree, and she eventually went to university. And I think that was the greatest experience of her life, frustrated by not being able to continue with your classmates at university and you're out of school, and simply because you don't have the right documents. When she got that, she even managed to get a bursary to go to university. And I think that on its own was a marvelous experience for her. So getting an ID document when you are a foreign national and be able to access work, etc., it's one of the miracles one experiences. And so yes, it's for an institution, for those who work with migrants, that is a miracle. It's worth doing that kind of work because it brings life, gives life to people, the kind of life they didn't have before. As religious leaders, we're supposed to uplift the lives of people. Preaching the gospel also means addressing the challenges that ordinary people face. And these are some of the material things that if you change people's life at that point where they experience difficulties, as I said, of not having proper documents, that's where we need to be. We can't say, no, that's a work of politicians. It doesn't work that way. If it's a work of politicians, then persuade the politicians to help you. Persuade the political party to help you if you think that's their work. But I think religious leaders can do that, can persuade governments. They are citizens and they speak on behalf of the citizens and can amplify the work of ordinary people who have a struggle with obtaining proper documents. And that's what the religious of the world need to be doing. There are migrants and refugees in all countries. In all countries, there will always be that minority that fell foul of the law of the country who need somebody to speak on their behalf, to implement, to practice some of those things they talk about, but also try to influence the government to change its laws so that people can become accepted in the countries where they are, where they find themselves. I think it's a vocation of all religious organizations to do that. Because if you don't do that, then you are not addressing the needs of the most needy people.